Mothra. Really the only kaiju to truly rival Godzilla, both in film and within the hearts and minds of the fans. As one of Toho's big five, only her and Rodan were ever their own creatures before coming into the Godzilla series, with King Ghidorah being introduced to bring all three of them together, and the last of those five being Mechagodzilla. This makes her truly a standout even among her giant-sized and much more boisterous peers. After all, one may find it difficult to stand out amongst an atomic dinosaur, a three-headed alien space dragon, a mega-sized monkey, a cybernetic clawed mechanical menace from outer space, a demonic crab that once slew Godzilla's son, while being, at first glance, a simple moth. However, she is far from anything but a simple nuclear moth. Being a mystical goddess among monsters, to an ancient protector of Earth, to even the queen of the monsters herself. She's got a long and illustrious history, the likes of which few, if any, have ever been able to match, other than Godzilla. She can wreak just as much destruction equal to any of her Toho counterparts, however, she is always a force for good, and a benevolent protector of Earth, even if not always protector of humanity. You can always count on her to be the morally correct side of any struggle, much like a Kaiju Captain America. So, let's take a look at the greatest heroic Kaiju to ever grace the Toho kingdom. From her being the inspiration for Godzilla to become Earth's atomic protector, to her dark counterpart Batra, and the twin fairies who always accompany her. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Wrap yourself in a big blanket cocoon, and let's take flight into Mothra's history. Which incarnation is your favorite? Comment your thoughts below. Before we get into the Lady of the Hour, there are three major misconceptions, or one you could call them moth conceptions, about her. First is actually that all Mothra are female. She is generally female, however there have been two versions of them specifically which have been male, one of them being Mothra Leo from the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, who should be getting his own video at some point in the future because that's really kind of its own giant thing. And only one from the Godzilla series itself, Tokyo SOS, where the crew nicknamed the male Mothra larvae Toho. He was a darker colored and having much longer tusks than his sister. However, other than these two, every Mothra is actually female. It was erroneously stated in the English version of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster that the Mothra in that movie was actually male. However, since that was actually the same Mothra larvae as was in the original Godzilla vs. Mothra, or rather Mothra vs. Godzilla, that is just a mistranslation, and that one was originally female. The second is that all Mothra are actually twins. This generally does hold true, as there have been many instances of two Mothra larvae hatching out of a single egg, but there have been just as many instances of a singular Mothra larvae hatching out of an egg as well. So, it's just many of the more popular depictions of Mothra have had two larvae, or at least some of the more notable depictions, specifically the original Godzilla vs. Mothra. And the last of these three is that she is actually magical. This is somewhat of a meta-contextual misconception, as within the movies themselves, it is occasionally referenced that she is nothing more than an irradiated moth, but this has, again, consequently bled over into real life, with many people just thinking that she is just a giant moth. However, it is mentioned numerous times in the movies, and frequently asserted, which does turn out to be true, that she does have this divine status from Infant Island. You can't really doubt the people in universe for thinking this. I mean, after all, most every other kaiju is either an alien or actually just mutated. So, it would be a bit of a stretch to say that yes, this is literally a divine moth monster that does exist. Again, not too strange for us from the outside perspective, but metacontextually, yeah, it would be a bit more of a reach. This is almost always why she is accompanied by her twin priestesses, the Shobijin, or at least a representation of them in various forms. Really, the monsterverse is the only time where somewhat of a stand-in for the Shobijin has not been present, though there have been allusions to them in previous movies like King of the Monsters and Godzilla Kong the New Empire. However, I do like this ambiguity as to whether Monsterverse Mothra is mystical in nature, or rather something more mundane like many of the other Titans, but I would prefer they keep it this way. I do very much like this ambiguity, and I think that is one of the best strengths of the Monsterverse, is the reinventions of the characters. Okay. With all of that out of the way, sorry if that's a little bit of a lot to take in before we get rocking and rolling, let's get on to Showa Mothra, the original who started it all. There actually are 4 Mothra in the Showa era, 4 separate incarnations of them, but since all of them actually do behave very, very similarly, and actually many of their appearances were relatively brief, we can kind of put all of them together and just consider them one large monolith, because most Mothra do the same things. The original Mothra, both the character and the movie, actually start with her traveling across the sea to reclaim the Shobijin after they are stolen. She starts, of course, in her infant larva form, traveling over to Tokyo, where she destroys Tokyo Tower and turns herself into her cocoon before taking flight in her final form. A little bit of a jump start from the atomic heat ray cannon actually causes her to finish metamorphosing into her final imago form. Where now in her imago form, she quickly finds her way over to Newkirk City, where she destroys it after being summoned in order to reclaim her twin priestesses. While she does cause much destruction to the city, this is actually in the interest of justice overall, as main human antagonist, as Clark Nelson, the main antagonist of the movie, had his goons slaughter all of the natives of Infant Island who got in their way when they were trying to kidnap the Shobijin, merely to take them as a display piece. After this, she would actually return home and live in peace. Her first movie is actually quite notable as being the first time a human was an antagonist of any kaiju film, with the kaiju being the distinct protagonist. A trend which would actually continue many times on into the future of various kaiju films. However, this is where she joins the Godzilla franchise, where she would lay an egg in the future, and would eventually be washed ashore on Japan in a massive typhoon. Once again, another businessman would try to exploit her and her kind, turning the gigantic egg washed ashore into nothing more than an amusement attraction, where the Shobijin would come ashore and simply ask for the egg to be returned to Infant Island, only for them to be captured themselves. With a little bit of helpful assistance from some friendly humans, the Shobijin escape and ask for Mothra's aid, where she actually goes off to fight Godzilla to protect her egg. However, she knows that she will not be returning to Infant Island as she has gone quite old by this time. And I also want to just bring up a little bit of a fun little side story about the first time I ever saw Godzilla vs. Mothra. This was actually a bit shortly after my mom and dad actually divorced, and my brother and I were living with our mother because we would see our dad on certain days of the week. And we wanted to go watch a Godzilla movie. And I looked at Godzilla vs. Mothra, and my brother said that it was about, a Mothra and her twin kids. And I mean, my brother and I are not twins, but I made a comment, so it's just like us. Not realizing what the word elderly in the summary meant, so that was a little awkward. Sometimes I wish I could go back and just kind of punt younger me so he'd shut up and not say things. But back to the movie. However, this Mothra knew that she was not long for this world, as she was not strong enough to fight Godzilla on her own, even with her poison powder attacks. She was sadly the first victim of Godzilla's atomic ray, having just received it in the prior movie, King Kong vs. Godzilla, but it was largely useless against King Kong back then. However, her twin daughters would carry on the fight in her stead, avenging her by cocooning Godzilla and causing him to fall into the ocean, though one of them would perish from their wounds after the fact. The survivor, however, would eventually redeem Godzilla in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. It was actually her that caused Godzilla and Rodan to join forces to face the space dragon monster King Ghidorah. However, when both Rodan and Godzilla did not join forces with her, she went off to face Ghidorah alone. Just as her mother did, she would face Oblivion knowing she was outmatched, because it was merely the right thing to do, even if it was hopeless. However, this was an act that did inspire Godzilla and Rodan to join forces with her in facing King Ghidorah. This was the start of Godzilla's heroic turn, and we have Mothra to thank for this. Fitting, as butterflies have often been a symbol of rebirth throughout history in many cultures. At some point later, she became her imago form by the time of Ibara Horror of the Deep, where once again, many of her people were taken. She flew over to Lecce Island to rescue and save her people, knocking down her former ally Godzilla, who, well, by this point had become a lot more aggressive because he had just finished wiping the floor with Ibara and was a bit jazzed about fighting, so who knows really what he was thinking right then. And while we don't see much of her presumed daughter in Destroy All Monsters, she was living on Monsterland with many of the other kaiju in peace in the year 1999. She eventually joined in the final battle against King Ghidorah, the very same King Ghidorah that her mother once drove off, coming full circle by forming the final joint kaiju counter-dragon space monster force, and the combined forces of Earth eventually snuffed out the three-headed space dragon. In the Showa era, Mothra was always a hero, fighting for good, inspiring both humans and kaiju alike to be the best version of themselves. She really is the ideal hero. She only had one major Heisei era appearance, Godzilla and Mothra: The Battle for Earth, with a much more minor appearance in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. This one expands much further on her mythos and giving her many new, more powerful abilities, especially the addition of her sort of dark twin Batra. While Mothra is the gentle guardian of Earth and those who live on it, Batra is a much darker and more aggressive protector who views humanity as a blight. 20,000 years ago, humanity, or at least ancient humanity, created a weather control machine, and Batra, who was created in response to this, nature viewing the creation as an abomination and requiring punishment and correcting, destroyed the machine. However, Batra went beyond his purpose, seemingly, and viewed humanity as nothing but a blight that must be expunged. Mothra would face her dark counterpart in battle and defeat him. However, she would lay his body to rest in the North Seas. She is always compassionate to the end. In the present day, history very much repeated itself, with Mothra's egg being found, and a human businessman misleading the Shobijin, or at least in the Heisei era known as the Cosmos, of his intentions, and took the egg to Japan to use, once again, as a tourist attraction. And one who also, for good measure, decided to take the Shobijin to use similarly as an attraction. Yes, there you're noticing a lot of similar beats, don't worry. It gets better, I promise you. However, Batra, who had reverted back into his larval form, was freed by a meteor strike that also similarly awoke Godzilla. However, Batra, seemingly always keeping in mind his duty to protect Earth, even aggressively so, simply shoves past and knocking down the newly hatched Mothra to engage Godzilla in a one-on-one battle. In the same turn as we saw before, Mothra does inspire redemption in both human and kaiju alike, getting the thief of the movie to become a better father and free the cosmos from the evil clutches of businessman guy, bad guy, and even redeeming Batra. This is very notable, as this is actually the same Batra as the one that was defeated 12,000 years ago, but not the same Mothra. Together they join forces to defeat Godzilla, as well as Batra revealing to her that there is a meteor on course to Earth that will hit in 1999, and will be quite dangerous for all of those alive on Earth. And he was to stop it. However, together in the course of the fight, Batra was fatally wounded as the two carried Godzilla out into the sea. Mothra unfortunately had to drop her newly found companion into the ocean along with Godzilla, and in honor of his sacrifice, placed a sacred seal over the place in the sea where they fell. She bid one final farewell to the cosmos and her newly found human allies before taking off into space to destroy the meteor. Once more, the protective, all-loving heroine we know and love. Though her actions may have inadvertently led to the creation of Space Godzilla, that origin is actually quite disputed, as she was able to warn humanity of the space monsters approaching, something which would be a little bit strange if the flesh attached to her was sucked into a black hole, spat out of a white hole, and created Space Godzilla. It was far more likely that Biollante was the origin source of Space Godzilla's DNA, mostly given the little tussle on the side of his face, but that's a whole story for another video, because Space Godzilla is friggin' weird, and I love it. But her warning does prove instrumental in the defeat of Space Godzilla, with characters being able to prepare Earth's defenses to a degree long enough to figure out some of Space Godzilla's motives and thinking, to eventually take him down. So even if she's not on Earth, she's playing 4D chess to save everyone. Based Moth friend. The Heisei era is also the one time where Mothra was first introduced with a lot more of her fantastical abilities. Her arc lightning attack, and her energy beams capable of really giving her an offensive punch to match even Godzilla. It also augmented some of her defensive skills, namely her 3D mirror, capable of reflecting even Godzilla's atomic ray back at him. This likely made Heisei Mothra one of the most powerful versions of Mothra we have ever seen. I'm not really much of a power scaler myself, but I will say that, yeah, she displays a lot of abilities that other Mothra forms just really haven't. Really, again, monsterverse is kind of the closest. Well, other than Rebirth of Mothra Trilogy with Mothra Leo, but that is a whole other can of wormhole I am not going to get into today, because that is that's a heck of a can of wormhole. This is also the only time in the entire Godzilla series where Mothra and Godzilla have fought on opposite sides without Mothra getting killed. Now, yes, Batra did end up losing his life in the battle, but every other time where Mothra and Godzilla clash, Mothra does end up dying, other than Godzilla, Mothra the Battle for Earth. Speaking of monsterverse, yes, we are going to be changing up the formula a little bit. she actually largely keeps her roots from the original movies. However, in place of Infant Island, which does actually exist in the Monsterverse, the Hollow Earth has somewhat taken the place of her original domain, and the Iwi people take the place of the Infant Island natives. There really is no stand-in for the Shobijin within the Monsterverse, though they are specifically referenced with Dr. Chen and her sister, someone I was kind of sad they didn't bring back in later Monsterverse movies. However, a very significant change has been made. Here she is from a long line of Moth Kaiju Titans who are all actually clones of one another. They share the same memories, the same powers, and have a very strong connection to Godzilla. Possibly not the Godzilla species as a whole, but our Godzilla specifically. Which of these things we don't actually know yet, but it also is worth noting that the eye spots on her wings, which were really a very notable feature of all Mothra versions throughout history, were in the Monsterverse specifically modeled on being Godzilla's eyes. Which is a neat little detail I actually didn't notice and now absolutely do every single time I see her and love it. The symbiotic relationship that the two of them have, with her being coined the Queen of the Monsters, is often equated as being romantic when it is in fact symbiotic. The two are almost old war buddies working together to defeat the original fight they had against King Ghidorah. Though she may work with Godzilla, she is no lightweight herself, given that she is a primordial kaiju herself. We got a video on them coming in the future. What this also means is that while the Mothra who assisted Godzilla in Boston may not be the same physical Mothra that assisted Godzilla all those thousands of years ago, it shares her memories, it shares her powers, her consciousness. It is the same Mothra in spirit, which is why Godzilla knows even when the resurrected Mothra in Godzilla Kong's New Empire attacks him, he knows it's his Mothra, because every Mothra is his Mothra. In contrast to all of the other Titans in the Monsterverse, who Godzilla has absolutely zero tolerance for them not respecting his authority, Mothra is the only one who actually can call Godzilla out and basically get Godzilla to reconsider when he is doing something. Gets him somewhat reassess his priorities, among other things, mediating a peace between him and Kong. She's also the only Titan other than Kong to reject King Ghidorah's alpha call to Raz Earth. Again, based on her abilities to stun both Godzilla and Shima with her God Rays attack, as well as her being a very long-lived species, she is very likely on the same Alpha Titan scale that Godzilla is. She just really lacks Godzilla's disposition and love for battle. However, she does very much keep her roots, as she is actually the one that allows Mark Russell to reconsider his stance and beliefs on Godzilla, realizing that he didn't understand Godzilla before and that to work better to understand truly who and what Godzilla is. Not to mention getting Godzilla to reconsider things and kind of live a bit in peace with King Kong. Even if Kong doesn't listen to him, they are really on the same side. Now again, that's not to say that Godzilla is really a fight-happy bully. A lot more complex than that. We got a video on that as well. Monster vs. Godzilla, these have the most misunderstood version of Godzilla. But we'll keep details on that a bit now. It's a great return to form and staying faithful to who and what Mothra was originally, while updating it for the very different take on the characters that the Monsterverse is. While she's not the first one to jump into a fight, she is no slouch in battle herself. Again, something capable of stunning Godzilla and Shimo in their powered-up forms is not something to be taken lightly. So she actually takes much more after Heisei-era Mothra than probably any of the other forms, at least in terms of power such. Personality-wise, she takes very much after the original Showa. Now, skipping a little bit back before we go to the Millennium Era, let's go talk about the Reiwa era versions of Mothra, Godzilla Singular Point, and Godzilla, the Netflix anime trilogy. The Netflix anime trilogy never actually appears in a physical form. The classic version of her egg, however, is shown. And a sort of mental astral projection version of her does appear in Godzilla the Planet Eater. There are canonically at least 3 Moth that have existed in the anime trilogy timeline, with Godzilla Earth having destroyed the first 2 of them, and the final being that egg form we see. The original fought to defend the last remnants of humanity and even managed to drive Godzilla Earth off when he was significantly smaller, and then sacrificing herself to ensure that her eggs and humanity were able to be moved to formerly Japan and would live on. Eventually, humanity did get transformed into the Hotua, humans with some of Mothra's DNA, which allowed them to survive in the more hostile world that Godzilla Earth had essentially created and transformed. With the 20,000 years in the future, the final egg still being an egg. Though even within this egg, it was actually capable of assisting Haruo in the mental space to allow him to break free of... I always get this guy's freaking name wrong. Mephiles? I know it's come from Mephistopheles, but like, that guy, the evil King Ghidorah guy, allowing him to break free and shatter the little portal thing that anchored Ghidorah to outside of our universe and made him immune to Godzilla's atomic ray, allowing Godzilla to defeat and drive off the three-headed golden nothingness. So yeah, the amount of power to, while still in the egg, break free of literal extra-dimensional mind control. Yeah, did not think that was going to be a power on the Kaiju bucket list, but that's a heckin' thing right there. In Godzilla's singular point, her form, or rather swarm, or I should say an eclipse, as yes, a group of moths is called an eclipse. And I will be looking for any and all opportunities to use that information now. Where they come from is not exactly clear. They actually resemble silkworms more than moths. However, they only appear in the prelude to the final battle with Godzilla Ultima, and actually appear out of the red dust that he creates. So it is not exactly certain if the Mothra in Godzilla's singular point are a natural species to Earth, or a similar extra-dimensional entity, much like the other kaiju of Godzilla's singular point. This makes her markedly different than all other versions of Mothra because she doesn't really display any personality. She's really, again, all of them are really just there floating around, almost as if they're there to wander and observe. Alright, now we're on to the Millennium Era. Yes, this has been a very long video. I almost wonder if this is going to be longer than the Godzilla more than a monster video. Godzilla Tokyo SOS. The Mothra in this movie is actually a descendant of the original Mothra. However, because this is an entirely different timeline from the Showa era, Godzilla versus Mothra, well, Mothra versus Godzilla didn't actually happen, so it's a separate thing, and it's not the original Mothra from that one, it's just a descendant of them. It's weird. It hurts your brain for thinking about it. Basically, this is not the same Mothra as the original, despite being related to that original one. In this timeline, Kiryu was created by, of course, dredging up Godzilla's skeleton from the Japan Trench and building a giant robot around it. However, Mothra viewing this as a violation of nature, after all, they did yoink the original Godzilla back from the dead, as his spirit does inhabit the body of Kiryu. She viewed it as a violation of nature, and told the Shobijin, or rather had the Shobijin tell one of the people who works on Mechagodzilla to go tell the people in charge of Japan, that if they did not return Kiryu, or rather Godzilla's skeleton, to the Japan Trench, Mothra would herself declare war on humanity, meaning that they were going to have to deal with Godzilla and Mothra both ganging up on them, even if they weren't working together directly. However, she was not unsympathetic to humanity's plight. After all, she understands that they needed Kiryu as a means of defense against Godzilla, so she volunteered herself to defend humanity in Kiryu's stead. Though humanity was not willing to relinquish their new weapon against Godzilla, when Godzilla did attack and before humanity had done anything about disposing of Kiryu, she did go on the defensive, fighting for humanity against Godzilla, even before Kiryu was launched. However, she also knew that she was not going to be around for much longer and did fight to the last. Humanity launched Kiryu in an attempt to aid Mothra against Godzilla, and the remaining egg on Infant Island actually did hatch, revealing itself to be twins. This is where Taro, that male Mothra we mentioned before, actually came in, along with his sister. The two of them made their way over to Japan, and the first and only act they ever witnessed from their mother was her defending them from Godzilla's attempt to atomic blast them, sacrificing herself to save both of them and all of Japan. Together, her twin children teamed up with Kiryu to defeat Godzilla, and cocooning him, so Kiryu, once again being taken over by the spirit of the original Godzilla, simply took the cocoon Godzilla and went home to the Japan Trench to rest in peace. She is a firm protector, but not one without compassion, something her children did inherit. After carrying on their mother's fight and defeating Godzilla and Mechagodzilla being returned to the Japan Trench, they simply went home along with the Shobijin. Alright, Godzilla Final Wars. This is the first and only time that in Imago Mothra ever fought alongside Godzilla before the Monsterverse. And the first time that any Mothra actually fought alongside Godzilla since Destroy All Monsters. It's kind of strange that the Monsterverse actually made Mothra and Godzilla like a big tag team in the Monsterverse, despite the fact that they've only ever worked together 3 times, and even then Destroy All Monsters was really not really them working together that much. I don't know, I just find that a bit strange. But, Final Wars. Like all previous versions, Mothra is an ancient guardian, this time having done battle with the ancient cybernetic alien monster Gigan. It broke out before humanity could do anything to stop it. Later on in the film, she joined Godzilla's final battle against both Gigan and Monster X, who, prior to her joining into the fight, the King of the Monsters was severely outmatched by the alien tag team. Gigan took her on in a one-on-one duel where he seemingly managed to defeat her. However, her little bit of a distraction allowed Godzilla to gain the upper hand against Monster X, and Gigan, seemingly defeating her and causing her to burst into flames, she instead retaliated with a fire heat bomber lariat destroying Gigan after he had decapitated himself with his own nipple discs. Yes, I am not joking, that is what they actually are. And destroying the monster. Now again, seemingly, she destroyed herself to destroy Gigan. Again, immortal magic moth creature. I highly doubt she was gone. And last but certainly not least, we have my first Mothra, actually, GMK. She is a somewhat drastic departure from the original and classic Mothra depiction. She does not at all hail from Infant Island here. There are no Shobijin in this movie, though there is a little bit of a reference to them. Originally, she was a creature slain by ancient Japanese warriors and was laid to rest under Lake Aikida. I think I'm pronouncing that right. However, she was reawakened with the souls of Japan's honorable dead and fought alongside Ghidorah, the god of the sky, with her being the god of the sea. I know, GMK is weird, but that's why I love it. Now, a bit of a little side note is, like all of the Guardian monsters, Baragon, Ghidorah, and Mothra, they don't seem to care much about the Japanese people as much as it is protecting the landmass that is Japan itself. She has seemingly more regard for humanity than Baragon or Ghidorah, as she actually sacrifices herself to protect JSDF ships and to revive Ghidorah after he'd been taken out by Godzilla. Yeah, Ghidorah goes down like a bit of a punk in this movie, and again, it's weird that he's a good guy. But it makes sense when you remember that Varan and Anguirus were meant to be the sub-ins here, but they swapped them out for marquee value. Man, Mothra really does have a bad tendency to just get absolutely vaporized. Even monsterverse. Just not always by Godzilla. Was Heisei Mothra actually really peak? I'm starting to think so. But that is all for today, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. This is a bit more of a rambly video than normal. Kind of wanted to make it a little bit more freeform than the sort of stock and standard scripted stiff videos we have normally. But what are your thoughts? What are your favorite versions of Mothra? I actually like how she is really one of the only consistent things throughout all of Kaiju cinema. Like, she's the only unambiguously heroic character, like, throughout all of her incarnations. I actually really like that. Do you think the Monsterverse did a good job adapting her? Do you think it did not? Would you rather her and Godzilla fight at some point in the Monsterverse? Would you like to see an explanation of what her history in the Monsterverse was? Or would you like to see them go back to really a much more traditional Infant Island stylized version of the character? Or future solo Mothra movies made by Toho? I'll leave that up to you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Long live the, I guess, Kaiju Queen in this case. And I'll see you next time. I am really hoping I can get this out before Tuesday. I underestimated how long this was going to be.